Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with how to build a really basic classical music library. And now we're talking about concertos in this fifth installment in this new series. We talked about yesterday the Grieg Piano Concerto as the fabulous first piano concerto you should get your hands on, and it really is just amazing. And we're going to do the same thing now for violin concertos. Now, concertos being works for solo and orchestra, most of them are written either for the piano or the violin. That's just the way it goes. From the classical period on, those were the two main instruments that composers and strolling virtuosi played. Now, there were also concertos for everything else, for violas and cellos and trumpets and flutes and clarinets, and we're going to get to some of those too, but very, very few of them. It's kind of amazing in the standard repertoire how few concertos there are for instruments which are not violin or piano. And there are even very few violin concertos because violin concertos are extraordinarily difficult to write. It really is a fascinating sort of musical niche, the violin concerto. The reason is because as orchestras got larger and violin technique got flashier, it required really specialized knowledge to write effectively for the violin. And most of the composers, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, who wrote for the violin were themselves virtuoso violinists. They wrote concertos for their own use, not for performance by others. And they didn't play other people's music either. The result was a lot of really bad violin music, because these people may have been great violinists, but, they might have been, so-so composers. Whereas most composers who were keyboard players, one type or another, a much larger percentage of those turned out to be very good composers, if only because of sheer weight of numbers, because there were so many of them. But the bottom line is that writing for a melody instrument like the violin, which has a somewhat limited dynamic range and range of tone, it can go very, very, very high, but it can't go very, very, very low. The lowest the violin can play is the G below middle C, which is 3 notes below middle C. I mean, it's a big range. I mean, it could soar into the stratosphere with rapturous and ethereal soprano tones and melodies and all that. Yes, it can do all that stuff, but it can very easily be obliterated, especially when the rest of the orchestra consists of violins, or mostly violins, which, if you've ever seen a symphony orchestra, violins are the majority. So there's already a lot of them there. And so balancing the violin against a larger orchestra, and as the Romantic era went on, orchestras got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, was also extremely difficult. And so writing violin concertos is kind of a tour de force. You had to have a composer who was a great composer, one who knew how to set the violin against a large orchestra without totally overwhelming it, one who knew how to write for the violin in terms of virtuoso pyrotechnics, because, a piano can pound. A piano can hold its own against the orchestra. A violin, it has to go, it stands out because of virtuoso passage work, dazzling displays of pyrotechnics. The piano does too, but it also has that clodhopper power. So the violin, and then you need, on top of it, a virtuoso violinist who is willing to play it. And throughout the 19th century, we see, this agonizing back and forth between composers and violinists who refuse to play things, who rewrite them because they think the composer didn't know what to do, or who had specialties that they wanted inserted in everything, so they just added them. I mean, really, it's just a huge mess. And for that reason, most composers write very few violin concertos, even if they've written great ones, even if they know how to do it, because there just weren't that many opportunities for performance, and there weren't many virtuosi of taste and discernment who were going to give it an outing under ideal circumstances. And so, the violin concerto is special. the really great ones. And the one we're talking about for this particular video is Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor, the famous one. It's always known as the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Mendelssohn actually wrote another one, an earlier one, for violin and strings when he was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old or something. It's a very good piece. He was an amazing prodigy. He also wrote a double concerto for violin and piano. So there are Mendelssohn concertos with violin, but the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, the one everyone's going to know, is the one in E minor. You know the opening tune. Da 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 da. Okay, I can't sing it, but it's incredibly beautiful. And Mendelssohn was the composer who invented the romantic concerto form. That is, the concerto that starts with the soloist right away. No big, long orchestral introduction while the soloist stands there like this, yawning, waiting to come in and do something. Nope, Mendelssohn has a couple bars of intro, dum, bum, 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 bum. And then the violin's there, front and center, and it stays front and center. It even accompanies the orchestra at one point, holding a low note forever while the second theme of the first movement comes out on the woodwinds. So it's a marvel of a violin concerto. The orchestration is gorgeous. You hear every single note. It never covers the violin, but it also gives the orchestra enough to do so that it asserts its own personality here and there, and manages to sound, it never sounds inhibited. Instead, Mendelssohn displays the violin against every possible combination of string and woodwind tone, and oh gosh, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely lovely, and it makes the ideal first violin concerto in your essential library of classical music. Mendelssohn wrote the piece, by the way, for Ferdinand David, was his name, David, a German virtuoso of the day, who was very happy to receive it, who also composed some music that nobody cares about. And it instantly entered the repertoire because it was just such a fantastically confident and brilliant piece of writing. It did get revised a few times, and somewhere out there are recordings of earlier versions or whatever, but oh my goodness, what a waste of time they are. They really are. There's nothing that they tell us that isn't better expressed in the version that we all know and love. And so the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is definitely the place to begin your violin concerto music. Now, the only other issue with this particular work, or any violin concerto, is whether or not you like solo violins. I have to be honest, I never cared for them for much of my life. It took me a long time, to reconcile myself to the sound of the violin against the full orchestra or solo or anywhere else. In chamber music, I always found violins kind of thin and screechy. Even violinists who have absolutely fabulous tones. And now I've learned otherwise. It's all about, as I've said so many times, taking the time to acclimate yourself. I always understood that the problem was not the violin. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years of great musicianship and sublime composition. And who am I to say, violin? Well, it's all your own taste, of course. And so I stuck by it. And now I'm not a connoisseur of the violin, I wouldn't say. I know my violinists. I know that there's a huge range of tone that they can make. I know that the violin is an absolutely amazing instrument that can do extraordinary things. I even took viola lessons for a while. I couldn't play the violin because, in order to play a string instrument, you have to start very young. You have to be either that or you have to have weird joints, because the position that you need to get on the instrument is like this, with your hand curled over the neck of the instrument. A cello is much easier because you've got it right in front of you and you can do it this way. It's almost like a guitar. There's that sort of thing, because guitars are similar. They have strings, and guitars have frets, which you press down, which help you find out where the notes are. The frets are where the different notes are in a guitar. In a violin, there's no frets. You have positions. hand positions, and those positions sort of put you in the vicinity of the notes that you need to get to, and you would just have to learn where they are on the fingerboard, and you have to twist your hand around like this and scrunch up on a very short, the neck of the instrument is very short. The fingerboard is very short. So it takes, and you have to take the time to bend your bones into that whole, it's hard. It's really, really, really hard and very unnatural. And unlike the piano, where you have two hands and you're just going whonk, 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 whonk like this, the violin has two completely different techniques for the two different hands. One hand is doing this thing, and it's a horribly unnatural position, on the actual instrument. The other holds the bow. And just getting a beautiful tone out of the instrument is a whole nother technique. Bow technique and fingering are totally separate and independent operations. That's what, I've really come to respect the violin and violinists because of the extraordinary technical ability they have to play the damn thing. And so that's something to keep in mind, I think, when you listen to violin music. If it doesn't really strike you at once, at least try to appreciate what goes into it. It's agonizing. Some bows are worth more than the violins. It's a whole world of a niche in the musical world of bow making and horsehair stringing and rosining them up and doing all this stuff. It's such an operation. Oh my God. That has nothing to do with, of course, of how great the music is. But the instrument itself is its own world, truly its own world. And that's why you may find as you run around the world of classical music, there are violin crazies, people who are violin connoisseurs, people who know a lot about string technique, because people who bother to learn it are often quite obnoxious about looking down on those who don't. That's one of the joys of classical music. You get to be, you get to look down on others. Some people enjoy it mostly for that reason, believe it or not. But the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is deservedly one of the most popular pieces of music in any form, and one of the truly great violin concertos in just its quality of melodic material, its perfection of craftsmanship. There's just not a note out of place in it, even if Ferdinand David helped Mendelssohn with the violin part. There's nothing that you could change or that doesn't sound fabulous. And so it gives you a wonderful and very high standard from which to soak up the idea of violin concertos and proceed to get to know some of the other ones that we'll be talking about later on in this series. So I have below, as usual, a list of great recordings of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto so that you can help select the ones you may want to listen to, or you can just go on YouTube and listen to it and just get to know it. One of the things I found is that getting to know the music is the most important thing. And after that, once you know it, you feel it, then you start sampling different versions, and you can begin to appreciate them for their individuality and for how deeply they speak to you and affect you with your particular taste. That's probably a good way to do it. It's not terribly long work, about 25 minutes long, so you won't have too much trouble, I think. It doesn't require a mega investment of time and energy, but you have to learn to be comfortable with the medium. That's the issue, I think, with these concertos. So get to it, and thanks so much for joining me. Keep on listening, friends. Take care.